Welcome to another exciting edition of Near Mint Comic Radio, your local comic shop, shrunk down, gamma-irradiated, sworn to protect a world that fears and hates it, and aired live-ish every week, only on the Non-Productive Network, the only place that would have us. I'm your host, Frank, joined in studio as often by Pete, James, and John Trumbull, writer for Back Issue Magazine from Tomorrow's Publishing. Hi, John Trumbull.
Hi, how you doing?
John,
Thanks for having me.
I'm very glad that you're here, since you're the only person who's ever read the book we're reviewing this week.
Before
this podcast. Yes, John Trumbull from Back Issue Magazine from Tomorrow's is here joining Near Mint as we are reading for the first time Crisis on Infinite Earths. Wow.
Yeah, we're a little late to the party.
I had no idea that you guys had not read this before. I was just assuming, because it's such a basic thing.
It is the building block of event comics.
Yes.
Marv Wolfman, George Perez, 1985, legendary. And in fact, I bet you that most of our listeners probably know most of the broad strokes of this, even if they haven't read it before.
Oh, sure. It's one of those books that everybody talks about, but nobody's ever actually read.
That's right.
Like Watchmen or V for Vendetta.
Sure, whatever, you
I've
monster.
read those two.
So here's the basic premise of the next few weeks on Near Mint. We're going to be reviewing Crisis on Infinite Earths, the original, over a couple of weeks, basically in pairing with the Crisis event that's going on in the CW Arrowverse. Is it officially the Arrowverse?
I don't think it's officially anything, but it's pretty much what everyone calls it.
Berlantiverse. No?
I don't know about that.
I've never cared for
Arrowverse.
the name Arrowverse.
I like
Green
Arrowverse.
Arrow is not that big of a thing.
I like Arrowverse
That's-
better than Lentiverse.
Lentiverse?
This is what you said?
Oh, Berlanti.
Berlanti.
Sorry, Berlantiverse.
Lentiverse sounds like a pasta. But so, props to DC Television for doing something interesting. I'll give them that. And this crossover that's supposed to end all crossover events should be very exciting. But we're going to talk about the comic book that launched the entire concept, more or less, of a crossover event book. So, Trumbull, you're the only one who's actually read this at the time, and you are a noted comic book historian. I feel like I can call you that.
I think you can too.
You're a writer on Back Issue Magazine. You've hosted many a panel that I've desperately wanted to go to, but I'm not going to get Comic-Con tickets. Come on, be serious, folks.
Some of them are up on YouTube. I'll send you some links.
Nice. I can watch YouTube at home. Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about the backstory of this thing. Why did Marv want to write this?
Actually, I brought my collected edition here with me today, and Marv has a very nice introduction that he originally wrote for the hardcover in 1998, so it was like 13 years after Crisis was done. And he talked about how this sort of originated in his fan days. He created a character. He wanted to do like a big crossover of all the company's characters, because with DC, they had the Justice League, which was all their big heroes, and they would once a year team up with the Justice Society.
Right.
Who were the golden age, the hero equivalents from the 1940s.
Right. No, this is Marv Wolfman. As a kid reading this would probably be like in the 60s, I guess? Maybe 50s, 60s?
Probably late 50s, early 60s. I don't know Marv's exact age, but he's a Silver Age baby. So he's grown up reading Silver Age stuff.
At this point, DC has already got a quote, multiverse problem. Right,
Yes.
You've got people who've.
I wouldn't call it a problem at that point.
At that point, there maybe not, but it's certainly an issue. And actually, he talks about it in that very forward that there was concern that this was preventing people from onboarding into comics.
Yeah.
You had to know about all the historical Golden Age comics and all the early part of the Silver Age, and that it may have been problematic for new readers.
Yeah.
Now, see, I don't know if I entirely buy that premise, because I understood this stuff fine when I was 10. There was a Justice League on one Earth, there was a Justice Society on another Earth. They were separated by the vibrations. They're in different dimensions, and
Well, I don't think that
you have
was,
some duplicate heroes.
I don't think that was the issue. I think. Sorry, James, you raised your hand politely, and I have to address it. Yeah, what is that?
Well, I mean, I'm a new reader to this. I know DC mostly broad strokes. I've read a lot of, best hits from Batman, Superman.
Then there's like the animated series and all
And
the
then,
stuff.
and then most of the rest
Right.
of my stuff is this animated series and other takes on these characters. And I'm going to say we're 2 issues in, I think, in this first chapter, and I am a little confused.
Well, let's dial this back, though. We're talking about the origin of why to do this. So when Justice Society and Justice League meet up, that's just cute. That's fun. It's a crossover.
It was a
once
once-a-year event,
Right.
and it was always exciting. It would happen during the summer when you're out of school, and you'd have 2 or 3 issues where these teams meet up, and you got like over a dozen heroes, and they're all off crossing over from Earth to Earth and fighting big cosmic menaces.
Pete, you had something to say?
I think where a lot of the problems came up were the properties that DC began acquiring, like Fawcett.
Right.
And was Atlas Comics, was that with...
No, Atlas is what became Marvel.
That's right. I'm trying to remember which one
They bought
Uncle Sam
they
was.
bought Charlton Comics.
Charlton.
Quality Comics was
Quality,
Uncle Sam.
yeah.
Well, clearly there's a lot. And we go from Marv Wolfman as a little kid thinking, oh man, this is fun doing these crossovers. I want this all the time, to Marv Wolfman as a working adult saying, yeesh, there's a lot going on here. And
How does Kamadi relate to... Kamandi, sorry.
Yeah.
Relate to the Legion of Superheroes?
Well,
and he says, let's how about we just have a universe spanning event, get everybody in the same room, sell a lot of comics, and
and
clean
we'll
up
straighten
work
it
a
all
little.
out,
Yeah.
and it'll be much more accessible to new readers, and it won't confuse James 30 years down the line.
And my favorite thing about that opening essay is that, I mean, as a concern that editorial had at the time of, will this be accessible for new readers? Do readers get shied away from number ones on comics? Which, I mean, how much have we gone 180 on that? All the things that he brought up in that story are still concerns for the comic industry today.
Yeah.
Is it too convoluted? Is it too complicated? How do we get people from the movie theaters into the comic shops or into their apps or whatever it is? And that's still a concern today. But the first attempt, probably not even intentional, the first attempt to tackle this with a universe-spanning event comic is Crisis on Infinite Earths, where the multiverse is at risk. The entirety of the multiverse in the DC multiverse is potentially going to be destroyed because of some huge event that we don't quite understand quite yet in the first 2 issues.
The tagline was, worlds will live, worlds will die, nothing will ever be the same. And I would say they lived up to that.
I say they lived up to this one more than they've ever lived up to anything since, which is a lot more catty than I intended. I am sorry, DC. Please sponsor the show. All right. Let's talk a little bit about our histories with it. We teased this early on. James, you've never read this before.
No, and I'm not even a big comics DC guy. Most of my experience with DC is from the animated series and even the live-action TV stuff that's going to be tackling this in a few weeks.
Okay. Do you know anything about Crisis? Did you know, or was the phrase
just the broad strokes? I know that I know the phrase. I know some of the iconic imagery. I know that it was kind of the first big crossover comic, an attempt to kind of clean up everything DC had going on, and that's pretty much it.
Pete, your idea was to do this.
Yeah, and I've actually never read the whole series either. I'm as frequent listeners know, I'm a Make Mine Marvel guy. I got into DC initially. I started following a little bit around the Death of Superman and Nightfall, and
Early 90s.
sporadically.
Then.
Early 90s.
So that would be 5-6 years after they wrapped this up.
And this was already an iconic event from my perspective when I got into it.
Oh yeah,
and
definitely.
I'm aware of the broad strokes of the effect that this had. But I've never actually read all the events of the story.
I, too, got all the broad strokes from reading at this period. In the mid to late 80s, I was a comic reader. I was mostly a reader of whatever my cousins would let me have after they were done with it. I was a hand-me-down reader, or whatever I could read at the stands in the convenience stores. Not even a comic shop. So this is part of the conversation in the playground. Everyone was talking about the broad strokes of what was going on, but I think I had to have been in elementary school at the time. It was a little early, but I never actually sat there and read anything other than a few out-of-place panels. John, what about you?
I had already been a reader at this point. I started reading comics, particularly DC comics, in the late 70s, early 80s. And when Crisis hit, I was like 12, 13 years old. So I was perfect age for it. I was old enough to have an appreciation for what the old continuity was. But it was really exciting that they were going to come in and redo and revamp everything. And you had that sense of getting in on the ground floor for all this stuff. So it was a lot of fun. And I was a big reader of the Justice League. That was one of the books that I'd subscribed to initially when I did my initial 4 subscriptions. And so I was familiar with the Justice League, the Justice Society. I'd gotten a lot of background on some of these characters. So I was pretty well versed in what I needed to be versed in before I started reading this. And it was fun to reread this.
It's an experience reading this book. So it starts off pretty straightforward with a dramatic opening. That style of dramatic opening will haunt event comics for the next 30 years, effectively.
That first page, I literally had to go back and make sure it wasn't duplicated in Infinity Gauntlet.
You know what? I looked it up. I looked up publication dates. I was like, how close were these two? And there's a good 5 years between the two, or at least between Thanos' Quest and this. So, but yeah, it's this big sweeping look over. This isn't an annotated podcast. We're not going to go panel by panel, but the start is a good place to start, and it introduces reintroduces the concept of the multiverse and how something is not right and there's something going on. In fact, we immediately see a world being destroyed in media res. Mm-hmm. Worlds will be destroyed here. And interestingly enough, I did not expect this. The first world or universe or whatever that's being destroyed is a Earth we've seen before.
Yes.
Well,
yeah, we absolutely. This is Crime Syndicate.
Earth 3. No, that's the second one. There's a world destroyed before that.
You're right.
The very first one is unnamed.
Right.
The ones with Ultraman and Power Ring.
In a splash page. Yes.
And Superwoman and Owlman and Johnny Quick. They were basically an evil Justice League.
Well,
that's the second world. So the very first splash page is a world being destroyed. It's where we meet our Pariah, although we don't have his name yet. Mm-hmm. And I actually have no idea because we've only read 2 issues for this. I have no idea who Pariah is. No concept. I'm not sure if he ends up becoming someone later on.
You basically get his basic deal in these first couple issues. He is a really distraught, whiny guy who goes from Earth to Earth just in time to see it destroyed, and he agonizes about that.
With lavender hair, at least lavender in the recolor.
Imagine, if you don't have this in front of you, imagine Adam Warlock with a vitamin D deficiency.
Exactly.
I almost thought he was like...
Yes.
I like that a lot.
Thank you. I was like, this is Adam Warlock, kind of.
Down to the Adam Warlock mascara.
He's got the black around his eyes, and he's got the kind of poofy hair.
One of the reasons I looked up the date, I'm like, is this really just a thumb the nose at Adam Warlock? Or is Adam Warlock a weird, like, no, I could do this less whiny? Time-wise,
I never made a connection between the two characters before, but I can kind of see it. Yeah.
So our first universe that gets destroyed, we literally know nothing about it. You just see Pariah lament that he can do nothing, which is a pretty dark way to start, and it doesn't get any lighter. The second universe on the next page after the splash page is the Crime Syndicate world.
Right.
So I'd never heard of this Crime Syndicate world.
Okay.
And I definitely was trying to take this seriously because it's a very big
that was your first mistake. This is 1985 comics. You can't take it too seriously.
So it's obviously a very big, like, hard, terrible thing for these people. But then I got to their names, and I was chuckling to myself the entire time.
They were created in the early '60s in the Silver Age. So there's a certain, if you're looking at it from today's perspective, there's a certain goof factor.
Yeah.
That said, I kind of liked Lone Superhero Lex.
That was interesting.
Yeah.
Let's just picking out art right now and period, right? So you look at George Perez's Owlman. Owlman, kind of a funny name, not that funny of a name, but a really goofy costume, right? He's got the bright orange cowl and Batman everywhere else.
And his deal was he had a super brain. He was like super smart.
But
He was not super fashionable, but
Why-
he was super
he
smart.
didn't have access to a color wheel.
Why
No.
does that look stupid on him, but not so much on Hawkman?
Sure,
It's
there's a lot of
basically the
questions.
same as Hawkman.
But if you look at the terror in the face of Owlman, where he
Yeah.
actually is there, there's a period of time. This is straddling two periods of comic book where this is just going to be fun. It's going to be maybe high stakes, but maybe we'll reset the clock. It doesn't really matter. If the next writer picks up the book and everyone's alive again, no one will care. And a period where, no, things are going to be grim, things are going to be serious, things are going to be dark. It's not quite grim dark yet. We're not Watchmen yet. But we're getting to the point where we're going to show this character terrified because he's helpless facing his own death.
And it's also a really effective opening because these are all parallel characters to the Justice League, to Superman, Batman, Flash, Wonder Woman, Green Lantern. And you see them die and fail pretty miserably. And that right there, that tells you this is something that could kill Superman, Green Lantern, Wonder Woman, Flash, and Batman. And
Yeah, but
so
only the bad ones.
The stakes are really high. I mean,
It's a
because
great way
they
of-
have the same powers and the same abilities.
They do, yeah.
Yeah.
Goodness will save them.
It's a great way to set stakes, despite the pedantic little kid screaming about goodness. It's a good way to set stakes in this really early on. And there's something about the fact that this is a known universe
Yes.
that dies. It's not just
Yeah.
we created. Yes, they did in the previous splash page, but it's not as if it was just mooks. Or,
Yeah.
or what have
And
you.
they'd been featured in the JLA JSA crossover just maybe a couple years before, so I was already familiar with these characters, and it was like, oh, whoa, okay,
And there are characters that have actually come back to some degree in certain properties.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We've seen Owlman. We've seen the evil Justice League. And
It's like I think we recently had that in one of the DC animated movies.
I believe so.
yeah,
I can't remember which one,
Crisis
but-
on Two Earths.
Oh, was that it?
And Grant Morrison did a graphic novel that was called Earth 2, where he basically revived the crime syndicate.
I believe Owlman was even in a episode of Batman Brave and the Bold. No,
Probably.
Batman Brave and the Bold? What is that animated
No,
series?
that's the one.
Was it?
Brave and-
Yeah.
The
Either
more
and-
kitty one.
I
something
think
like
it's
that.
Brave and Bold.
No, it was
No.
Brave and the Bold.
Oh, okay.
So yes, but we also have a moment of, I guess you're starting off a DC story, giving a Superman analogy, no,
Parallel.
allegory.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't know
yeah.
if anybody else
Yeah.
noticed this, but there were slight parallels between Lex Luthor sending
mean?
his son.
How do you mean? How do you
Well,
mean? I don't understand.
I mean,
I think
they
that-
do everything short of like actually playing the John Williams music from Superman the movie.
Really? Because I thought I read that they did play that.
It's penciled in notes.
There we go.
Yeah, play your
Frank, it's in
copy.
the annotated,
Hit play
right?
now.
It's in the
Yeah.
annotated. Yeah, it's pretty. It's
Because
on the nose.
we should back up and explain. On Earth 3, where all the heroes are villains, we have one single hero who in this world is Alexander Luthor, who's a nice scientist who's bald and has a wonderful red goatee. And in this universe, he is in love with Lois Lane, and we find out in Crisis 1 that they've gotten together and they have a young son. So
I really liked this. I know
Yeah.
it's heavy-handed, but I liked it. I liked it a lot.
We're talking about spanning periods. This is the time to be a little heavy-handed and get away with it.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%.
it was a few years ago. I was interviewing Jerry Conway, who's written like a ton of Bronze Age
Oh, yeah.
comic books. He's the guy who killed off Gwen Stacy, if you don't know. And he had a great quote. I was talking to him about some issue of the Justice League he'd written, and he was like, "The Bronze Age of comics was the last era where you could get away with stuff like that. You could just be goofy and weird. You still had enough of that Silver Age flavor that you could do it.
Right.
And so that's why I love the Bronze Age so much. It's the best of both worlds.
Yeah, absolutely. And it comes across, and of course, the stakes also come across. When baby Luthor goes hurling through the various multiverses, eventually landing to our, I guess, protagonist at this point. That's all we know. The base of the protagonist, or into some JSL satellite. I'm not going to do the broad strokes.
They
here.
beam him into the JLA satellite, but what they didn't know on Earth 3 was that the JLA had abandoned that satellite.
Right.
Yeah.
And they were off in the rather underwhelming JLA Detroit team.
Right.
But they sent him to a dead satellite.
Yeah.
Oh, well,
Whoopsie.
the end.
Which is the equivalent to Kansas. Anyways, ooh, no, this is where we meet Lydia, is what I believe she's
Lyda.
called. Lyda.
Lyda.
And before she becomes Harbinger, but very shortly before she becomes that. And she speaks to this unknown person who is, we will later find out in this issue, is the Monitor.
Yeah.
Well, she refers to him as the Monitor.
Yeah, she
Now,
says-
now the
We just don't see him.
The Monitor, we DC readers, we kind of knew about the Monitor at this point. He'd popped up in sort of cameo appearances, and he was always this shadowy figure, and he was basically like a supervillain arms dealer.
Yeah.
He would sell weapons to the bad guys, or he would give them henchmen for a particular thing. And they'd been teasing this for probably a year before Crisis 1 hit.
And the interesting thing is, it's despite that sounds like, well, this is just a recycled villain that doesn't quite fit the big scope they give him later. Apparently, Marv Wolfman had this in mind since he was the librarian back in his fanfic.
He created him as a kid,
Yeah.
and he was like, oh, yeah, this is going to be a guy who kind of watches and monitors everything, and he's going to be called the Librarian.
Which is every child's worst nightmare.
Yes, I'm going to charge you 5 cents a day.
You could almost...
Okay, no hate mail from Noah Wiley, please.
Or fans. So this, I like tracking the creation of this, because the Monitor obviously monitors the multiverse and is the one who's getting the heroes together to fight this battle of heroes and villains, just characters together.
Right.
We know that he was hinted at in earlier comics as an arms dealer who is helping villains, and we also know a little bit about what Marv was writing for this. He was a librarian. Now, I think, in my opinion, the problem with comics in this period is that doesn't really track. The arms dealer villain guy who eventually monitors all the multiverse and tells people that, oh, there's a crisis coming, doesn't feel like the same character.
Not at all.
And they kind of address it, if not in this issue, the next issue, I believe, is where they say, well, why were you dealing with all those weapons to criminals? He's like, never mind that now.
It is such a hand wave.
It is.
And it is still one of the huge, in my opinion, one of the huge plot holes in Crisis why was he helping out all the villains and only the villains?
Yeah, but I think it kind of makes sense if you dial the clock back and see what Marv Wolfman's writing process was. Starting off with it'd be cool, a villain who monitors all the other, like all the heroes, knows their secret identities, and he sells that information to other villains. You've got a person who is basically a monitor, someone who is paying attention to all this stuff, may stumble upon some information that is important, and that's why they becomes essential to the next story. But you could almost see the drafts happening in the background. So it's both fascinating and kind of a plot hole, but this is how the sausage was made.
I think they do a little bit explain, if I can give Marv a little bit of a defense, that he makes a comment about he's been monitoring all the heroes and testing them.
They do a good
he said something like, oh, this was to add to my data or something like that. And it's just like,
don't get me wrong,
okay.
This is the great part of writing in what's modern American comic publishing, is because you don't have control over the toys handed to you. When you get in charge, you have to make it work. And if you can make it work, that's what makes you a legend. And I think this does work.
Marv had more control over his toys than, say, the writers over at Marvel who got handed the toys from Secret Wars.
Right. I mean, you also have to remember, at this point in time, Marv Wolfman and George Perez were working on the New Teen Titans, which was DC's best-selling book at the time, by far. I mean, it was comparable with Uncanny X-Men. So they were like the 500-pound gorillas of DC Comics. They could do whatever they want, and I'm sure that's how Marv was able to push this through.
Right, and that's why they had years to come up with the story.
It's like how Marvel ended up with Bendis and Hickman.
Sure.
And comics we've been getting.
Speaking of 500-pound gorillas, let's talk about the people that Harbinger goes out to.
Oh,
recruit.
nice transition, Frank.
Thank you.
Very good.
We point out our transitions,
I wanted
ruining
to make
it.
that one.
No,
James, go for it.
that was...
No, I lost it.
All right, thank you. So, these got to be characters that are familiar to you. James, do you know Gorilla City?
Yeah,
You have
obviously
to
I
be
know
our-
Gorilla
You
City.
know King
and
Salivar?
Well, obviously, I
Salivar
know
is a
Gorilla
name I
City.
recognize.
Yeah.
Obviously, Grog is a name I
Grodd.
recognize. Grodd, sorry. Grodd is a name I recognize as far as Gorilla City. And I obviously assumed there would be other gorillas in Gorilla City, but that was pretty much it. That was all the gorillas. I knew in
Talking
Gorilla
gorillas,
City.
It's-
long and proud history in DC Comics. Very many. Like, they discovered at some point in the Silver Age that when they put a talking gorilla
Yes,
in a
it
comic
makes
book,
sense.
it sold
Beautiful.
better than. So that was one of the things that they did, and everyone had their own talking gorilla.
So every
just-
every show on the network has a gorilla on it.
That's just bad logic, though, because it's Gorilla City, not Gorillas City.
Oh, I guess
Yeah.
that's true. It could just have been one.
It's a
gorilla.
collective gorilla. So
Well, it's not two Gorilla City, and you knew about two of them. So,
Yeah.
all right, this is enough gorilla jokes. This may be all the gorilla jokes we have for this episode. Tune in, keep listening to find out. Yes. So yeah, Salivar. What weird pick?
obviously the first guy that you go to when you have thousands of parallel Earths threatened. It's
He's
like,
not-
let's
he's
get
not
the
even-
king of Gorilla City.
He's not even the most famous gorilla
He's
from Gorilla
not
City.
even the
That's
most
no.
famous gorilla from
No.
Gorilla City. He's not even the most dramatic choice you could pick because you've got villains on the team, which adds a little bit of drama. Not
Yeah.
Grodd. This guy with his high popped collar, which is a good look
Well, yeah.
for a gorilla. For
Very
any
regal.
gorilla. Yes.
Very regal. He's got a nice red cape. It
not
looks very sharp.
I'm not embarrassed to admit that like 70% of the time I saw him on a panel, I thought it was Doctor Strange. I was like, why is Doctor? Nope, that's
Why
still
is
a
Doctor
gorilla.
Strange a
I
gorilla?
mean, I'll just go there and I'll say not enough comic book characters rock the nude with a red cape look. And I would like to see a little more of that in
All right.
comics.
I
A
would
little
make
more
that
of
happen.
naked characters with just red capes.
I would
Oh,
say
yeah.
there's almost the exact correct amount of characters that are nude with popped red capes.
Regardless, this isn't a weird choice. We're going to dial back a little bit right here.
Yeah.
Just for a second. Maybe I should have waited till the next character gets introduced. We talked about Secret Wars, right? Another
Yeah.
big, epic, sprawling. But by then, we already have a little bit of practice on how to do this kind of thing. And
It was largely
Embarrassing.
a response to Crisis.
but also a toy sale pitch,
Yeah.
right? This is here's the toys,
Right.
make the story. Now, as weird as that is, the choices in recruitment on this book, which is as far as I know, not backed by like Mego or no toy company.
No,
was
no.
pushing
This
it.
was conceived as a story. Crisis or Secret Wars was conceived as a tie-in, and because it required less research than Crisis on Infinite Earths did, it hit the stands first. They when they were researching Crisis on Infinite Earths, they hired Peter Sanderson, who is a comics historian, to read literally every DC comic that had ever been published.
Dream job
and
or
take
nightmare job?
notes.
You decide.
Nightmare job.
I think a little of both.
Right.
I mean, he was going back to literally almost 50 years.
So let's move on
comics.
to the next Harbinger Gatherer. What? That's not the way I would have chosen to say that. Anyways, Dawnstar? Is that what her name is?
Dawnstar from the Legion of Superheroes, who is the American Indian member who had wings like Hawkgirl and had super tracking powers.
Yeah.
Because American Indian.
Yeah, I am not. Yeah, I did not know that this was an American Indian character, but I could have guessed it very easily because of the number of times she explained that she could track anything. This is problematic, but at a time when, honestly, I think people would have probably just been happy to see a character.
She was
On the page.
like a character that was introduced in the 70s when they were trying to make the Legion more diverse.
Right.
more diverse than Matter Eater Lad.
Yeah, because, I mean,
the
this-
Matter Eater population of America is well represented.
the Silver Age Legion, it was just all white guys and girls, and you also had Brainiac 5 and Chameleon Boy, and that was
They were
about
green.
it. And then Shadowlass, who was blue, but they didn't have any black people or other
people of color.
ethnicities,
Yeah.
and they tried to correct that in the 70s with varying degrees of success.
Our second character is introduced, kidnapped once again by Harbinger, and that's about it.
I had no idea who this character was. So
She's kind of fallen by the wayside
but
over the
it's-
years.
learning all that was awesome.
Can I put in a little bit of a spoiler and a / warning going through this list? This list is basically, with a couple exceptions, going to consist completely of characters whose names have never followed the phrase, my favorite superhero is.
That's not entirely true.
Sure.
That's why I said with a couple exceptions.
Firebrand is next, which is interesting because this is a time pull, not necessarily from a specific Earth. I mean, I guess
No, she
Legion
was
is
on Earth
close.
too.
She was Earth 2, but I don't. It's very odd. So we don't.
She was from Justice Society.
Okay, that's why. So we got a World War II pull from there. Firebrand, I was vaguely familiar with. I thought it was somewhat interesting to read this pull because there was a moment of like, oh, should I hide my secret identity? I don't know. Anybody else have anything else about that?
I thought Firebrand was a really cool name.
Yes.
I enjoy Firebrand because All-Star Squadron was another book that I was reading, and that was the book that she was introduced in. So
that's cool.
I was familiar with her.
That's good because that's a book that you're reading at the time. You're interested in. Yeah, that's a nice.
I enjoyed the All-Star Squadron. She was basically a female version of a Golden Age hero. There was a guy named Firebrand who was from Quality Comics who didn't have any superpowers. He would just run around punching people out, I believe, and he had a red and pink outfit with a see-through shirt, and they gave that to his sister, Danette Riley.
Nice.
And she coincidentally gets fire powers, so she
Good.
becomes Firebrand.
It's a good
It
thing
was
she got
very
those powers.
convenient, very on brand.
Nice.
So
Said her brother Dan had a little conversation. It was like,
and
look,
she just got like a little one-piece bathing suit. She was like, I'm going to wear this under the pink see-through shirt because 1942. That's probably not the best thing for me to do.
it's about as risque as you can get.
Exactly.
Right.
But
I was excited about this next one.
All right.
So the next one is Blue Beetle.
Right.
I am a really big fan of more of the modern iterations of the Blue Beetle, which this is very different from.
yeah,
But I also really enjoyed it. Like I was having fun with it.
So this is Ted Cord.
Yes.
Blue
Yes.
Beetle.
I love
it
Ted
is the
Cord.
Steve Ditko Blue Beetle.
I'm missing the more recent.
Jaime Rodriguez.
Jaime Reyes is
that's
the
Which
modern
I
Blue
also
Beetle.
I think he's a pretty interesting take on the character. So this little factoid, this is the first time Blue Beetle has reappeared or appeared at all in a DC published
Yeah.
book.
Really?
I did not know
very
that.
first time he appeared in
wow.
DC comic book, and it was exciting because this was like the latest group of characters that DC had acquired because their what was his title? Executive editor Dick Giordano. He had worked at Charlton back in the day, so he had a great affection for these characters: the Blue Beetle, Captain Atom, Nightshade, Question, a few others. And they basically DC acquired these characters sort of as a present to Dick Giordano.
Yeah, and that was from the 70s was the last time I believe Blue Beetle was in a book, in a Charlton Comics book. So people would have been familiar with it, would have been excited if they had been told like there's Blue Beetle's going to make his reappearance. And when they did, they would have gotten effectively Ted Cord. They would have gotten the Beetle that they had known and loved and hadn't seen in years.
This was the character that Steve Ditko went on to do after he left Spider-Man in the 60s. So
It's a lousy night for TV anyways, so. I love that line. It's so good. No? Okay.
There's a lot of fun about
Yeah.
this moment because he's stopping a bank robbery, which is the most classic thing you can do. I think a bank robbery. There's a hostage situation.
It's a hostage situation. I don't think they ever said what they were after.
Yeah.
I don't remember that, but
We want the things.
yeah.
Classic.
They were just like, we have to get away from this hostage thing. And it's like, well, why did you take the hostage?
And
Classic
only-
hostage.
I think
Yeah.
the only
Raisins.
the second character to willingly go to this
Yeah.
call to arms. So far, we're at 50-50 between kidnapping and recruitment.
Yes. Yeah.
So good for you, Monitor.
Yep,
You're
yep.
doing this right. This next scene baffled me, and I have no context for it. This
Where the
Harbinger
shadow thing is taking over.
the shadow. So this Harbinger is going to Atlantis, I think, during the Ice Age.
Yeah.
And is looking for the sorcerer who protects
Arian, the
Atlantis.
Lord of Atlantis.
I have no context for this character. No idea who he
Ditto.
is. Wasn't even sure that what Atlantis was at this point in its history. Clearly on the surface, not on the water.
Arian, Arian is a character that's kind of fallen by the wayside. I don't think DC has really revived him much. He was around before Atlantis had sunk into the water. He was the big mystic sorcerer guy, and it started out as a backup in Warlord, I think. And He got it. It was popular
this
enough.
is
He
the
got his own series. He was
Secret History of Aquaman's Atlantis. That's great.
I don't know if he was explicitly connected to Aquaman at first. I think it might have just been its own thing, and then they eventually tied it into Aquaman.
Because it does make sense that there would be at some point a pre-sunken Atlantis,
Right.
Since part of the Atlantis myth is it's not
sunken.
Yeah.
it's sunk.
That might be why Arian hasn't been around much.
Right.
It's a little problematic explaining exactly where on the timeline he falls.
Well, this was also another sort of problem that DC had beyond just the parallel Earths. Is they had, say, different versions of Atlantis. Like Superman would visit Atlantis where it was all mermaids and mermen, and then Aquaman had his own Atlantis that had no connection to that Atlantis, and then we had the Aryan Atlantis. And so they were these three different concepts that didn't really relate to each other, and they had different versions of the future. They had the future where Commandy, the last boy on Earth, who had all the talking animals, and then we had the Legion of Superheroes in the 30th century, and those two futures didn't really jive together.
I remember as a kid thinking that maybe Commandy lived in like a zoo inside Legion, and they just weren't telling him. They're like, "Oh dear!" Like it was a Star Trek. Like we can't get involved in this. We are just studying with this boy who's with the talking animals in this little bubble.
Kind of like
That
the theory
was so dark.
Kind of like
That's
the
a
theory
great
that
story.
that Mad Max, the nuclear war never happened, and Australia just did that.
It's just Australia.
It's like the rest of the world is normal.
Yes, I love it.
I mean, with Commandy, that was basically DC came to Jack Kirby in the early 70s, and they were like, "Hey, can you do something for us like Planet of the Apes?"
Yeah, it makes sense.
And that's what you. And Kirby was such a creative guy; it ends up only sort of tangentially related to Planet of the Apes.
And some things in the multiverse make sense where they just lives out there, but then it gets a little confusing when you have to have a crisis.
But
in this-
Arian, the main thing you have to know is he's from Atlantis and he's a sorcerer. That's really his whole deal.
So at this moment is when we first see one of the shadows attacking Harbinger, and apparently, well, actually, I'm not going to say it. I know we've read 2 issues, and we probably already know by now, but did either of you 2 new readers have an idea of what happened in these 4 panels with Harbinger?
Where her eyes turn black.
I'll be honest,
I didn't even
did not
notice that.
I did not remember reading that page.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, I may have flipped past that page accidentally.
It's a little hard because at this point, like the stories aren't splitting up. So, like, all right, this is the end of Ted Cord, and then this happens. You know, this is a whole nother.
It's a little oblique because also Harbinger has split off into all these duplicates to recruit all these people. So she's kind of like Madrox the Multiple Man. She's like split off into all these people to recruit each person individually.
So theoretically, the one in like the insane asylum just a few pages before is not the same one in like the pre-sunken Atlantis.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
I couldn't figure that out at first. I was like, well, are they all like in her back pocket when she's going, or is she going back, dropping them off at the satellite?
The shadow thing is just taken over like one of her duplicates.
And that's the one that ends up in Atlantis.
I believe so, yes.
Yeah. So effectively what's happening is, and it's not clear, but Harbinger did split herself out, go out and recruit all those people. One of them gets infected and infects the whole. They do mention this. It's just a little confusing. You have to get 2 issues in before you're like, oh, that's what's happening. Although we don't know why. We get the recruitment of Psycho Pirate, who is the weirdest villain that is constantly shoehorned as... You wouldn't expect this villain to be important. That's his role in the DC universe, and this is the start of that.
I would say he's got a rival. That would be Dr. Light.
Yes.
For that title.
Yeah.
I gotta say,
well, I'm sure will not come into play in this at all.
Stay tuned. I gotta say, I love the Psycho Pirate. I love his power. I love that he like displays an emotion on his face, and if he's looking at you, he makes you feel that. Like if he is like, you should be sad, and then he goes like, ah, and then suddenly you feel sad. I love that. That's such a cool original power. And
the fact that it's addictive for him and it hurts, it's like,
and he's got a neat
I liked
costume.
that angle.
Yeah.
The whole thing that he's like, oh, once I start manipulating people's emotions, I don't want to stop. And I'm like, ooh.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
This guy seems problematic.
I
I don't know if I want him on my team.
He has a tenuous grip on sanity and reality and all that.
If we're just looking at power levels, this is an end of multiverse event. We've got a influential gorilla.
Yeah.
We've got
The
Lady with-
cornerstone of every great team, influential gorilla.
we got Lady with Wings who could track anything.
It worked
Right.
for the Ghostbusters.
We have
Lady who can set things on fire.
and I don't remember her being super powerful on that spectrum, but maybe I'll give it to it.
Yeah.
She can't control fire. She can light fires.
Well, she
Yeah.
got at least
She has
start
the
an oven.
superpowers of a match.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then we have Ted Cord. Sorry.
Yeah.
No, but genius inventor, fine.
Right.
This is our first villain, straight villain. I guess we do have we didn't get the wizard from Atlantis yet, but we see her on her way.
Yeah.
So we do see our first straight villain in this, who, I mean, interesting, but it doesn't seem like the multiverse destroying event would have a lot to do with mildly changing people's emotions.
There's another weird hand wave in the second issue where Harbinger says to the Monitor, she's like, why did we recruit him again? And the Monitor is like, the menace we face is one of emotion. And it's like, wait, antimatter consuming parallel Earths is a menace of emotion?
It's angry antimatter.
I don't know. I don't get that. And it's just Marv wanted the Psycho-Pirate in the story.
We're going long for the first episode because there's so many introductions.
Yeah.
We do eventually get to our wizard here. It's an interesting battle. First experience that Harbinger is actually maybe a little dark, although her dark eyes have now become bright white, so the coloring is very confusing in this. I don't have much to say to this other than, hey, look, we've got geometric patterns behind the hand of a wizard. I'm glad.
That was his symbol.
Yeah.
With those intersecting triangles.
And we go right into Firebrand.
Firestorm.
Firestorm. I'm sorry. We ready to Firebrand.
Firestorm, the nuclear man.
Yeah.
So
Okay, we've got to have confusing name crossovers, too.
Of course.
Did we really need two fired people?
So I've got two questions.
Again,
All right,
I kept track of
James.
this all just fine when I was 10.
James. Yes.
I've got two questions here. So my big introduction to Firestorm is from the Arrowverse.
I'm so
Sure.
excited.
Okay.
From the
And
Flash show. Yeah.
He just has fire powers. But here he seems to have some sort of matter manipulation, right?
definitely
had
Does he have more
I feel
as he get more
the
as we
way
get
they
more into
explain it in the Flash, I think, is that he controls nuclear reactions.
Okay.
But that he really likes doing fire.
Like,
Okay.
That's the effect.
Yeah.
he
But
wants.
still-
Still,
how to
even
do that
nuclear reaction, he's like changing ice into flowers a panel later.
Right. His power, his basic deal was he would rearrange the molecules in stuff and just transform it.
Yeah.
So, like, he could...
Are
he
there
could,
molecules in fire, though?
Sure.
Sure.
he would just
Okay.
transmute stuff.
So
That was basically what
matter,
his deal
particles,
was.
the whole deal.
The second thing I have is this the first sort of thing with him and Killer Frost?
I'm so glad this came up
Because it's
we're
a thing
doing
in
this
the
'cause of
Arrowverse, and as far as it's a thing in the CW show.
she is a villain of his in the comic.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm aware
I
of.
believe this is the first time they make out for a very awkward long period of time.
Yeah, because Killer Frost, her original deal was she was very homicidal, and
Right.
she was like, I believe, a jilted lover of Professor Martin Stein, who was one half of Firestorm, because Firestorm's
Okay.
the two guys,
Right, the two guys together.
Ronnie
right?
Raymond and
Raymond and
yeah, and they merged together to become Firestorm,
Mm-hmm.
which was kind of a neat thing. And yeah, she was. There've been a few different versions of Killer Frost, and this is the first Killer Frost, if I remember correctly. It might be the second.
This is
There've been a few.
super problematic.
Oh, yeah.
When
Yeah,
they roofie her into falling. I get that, like, hey, we need you for some reason. We have a fire person, we need an ice person,
Right.
So you're the person we're going to use, even though we have a molecule person who could technically do both. But hey, we need you to be a little less killer.
Yeah.
Why does the emotion? First of all, why does Psycho Pirate's emotion of smile be like lustful after fire? What unwritten thing is there a slash fic for Psycho Pirate and Firestorm?
He was
Because
shipping Firestorm and Killer Frost.
If he just thought of that,
He's just writing fanfic in Arkham Asylum.
Man, that is awesome. I want to believe that world exists.
I'm trying to find the line. There's this one line in there where well, she's not that ugly.
Yeah, he
Yeah,
does.
yeah,
It's like
yeah.
that's later on.
Firestorm is like,
This
she was
might
trying
work.
to kill me a minute ago, but she likes me now and she's making out with me. I'll go with it.
Later on, when they're in the Monitor's base, he's contemplating it.
Yeah.
All right.
Oh man.
So at this point, all the heroes we get a beautiful splash page of all the heroes and many who we weren't introduced to, which we'll quickly touch on. Heroes and villains, I should say,
Right.
hanging out in the Monitor's waiting room, waiting to speak to who summoned them there.
Yeah.
And we get gray-templed Superman. Oh yeah, would you
The
like to go
Earth
through
2 Superman.
We've got Geoforce.
Geoforce
From The Outsiders.
Which are all characters I just learned about by watching the new version of the Young Justice.
Teen Titans?
Not
No,
Teen
the Young
Titans.
Justice.
Young
Season
Justice
3?
anime, yes.
Okay.
Animated
Okay.
show,
The
season
animated,
3.
yeah.
I
Yes.
just got all introduced to all the Outsiders characters and was actually just recently rereading their backstories.
Oh, great.
cool.
Good.
All right.
That was a fun.
So you're
fun
up to
thing
speed
run
on
into.
Geoforce.
I am indeed up to speed on Geoforce.
Cyborg's there, which everyone
Cyborg.
remembers
Recently
from
read his wiki.
cartoons.
Yeah.
The John Stewart Green Lantern.
Yeah.
Right. This was like right after Jon Stewart had taken over from Hal Jordan full time.
Is that Polaris there?
Dr.
Dr. Polaris.
Yes.
Yeah.
He was a supervillain. He had magnetic powers and he had multiple personalities.
The only personality that's showing up now is bitch. He
Yeah.
is very, very.
He was like a
he's
Jekyll and
100%
Hyde
that bitch.
kind of
Oh,
guy.
okay.
But
Yeah.
yeah.
There's Obsidian.
Obsidian. I did not.
Who,
Yeah.
if I remember correctly, that's Alan Scott's son.
Yes. Yes.
wow.
Alan Scott, the
Obsidian.
Golden Age Green Lantern.
He was in a group called Infinity Incorporated, who were basically the sons and daughters of the Justice Society. Because the Justice Society, they were all the older characters because they originated in the 40s. So these were their kids who were in their 20s.
And a character whom I've never met before, but whose name is the best name I've ever read. Simon.
Simon.
But with a silent P. in
His
the front,
power
with
is
the
PSI.
psychic powers.
His power is that he likes to
Oh.
do drawings and they come to life.
He is a psychic. He has an exposed brain, which is a good look on anyone.
He has a little glass
Yeah.
helmet thing, and then you can see his brain, and he's got a ponytail, and he wears a long
Ponytail.
pink gown.
That is the ultimate mullet. He is in total business.
it might be
front,
more of a rat tail.
Yeah.
I don't know. Is it a
party
mullet?
in
I
the
don't know.
back.
Yeah.
It is crazy, and he is my favorite character of all time.
Yeah.
Ultra mullet.
Yeah, he was in a villain group called the Fearsome Five, who fought the Titans.
Sorry, the other four didn't rate.
Yeah.
He was in a group with, let's see if I can name the others. Dr. Light, Gizmo, who was like this, who was a little person who invented gizmos, and then we had Mammoth, who was this big strongman
Yep.
type, and Shimmer, was that her name? He had a sister who also like transmuted stuff.
Oh, I can't remember because she was not in the
Yeah.
Teen Titans animated show. They replaced her with somebody else.
I
and
think her name was
escapes me.
Shimmer, and she had like
That sounds right.
Yeah,
Yeah. All right. So at this point, basically, monsters attack. It's the shadows, these things that look suspiciously like the Monitor.
Yep.
And the heroes attempt to stop them, but can't really. And there's a couple awkward scenes between Firestorm and
Your buns won't get a bruising.
yeah. This was basically just Marv needed a humorous subplot in there.
Yeah,
so
he got it.
He was
I am
like,
on-
He did it.
Did he though?
Other than the
yes.
problematic origin of this subplot, I am on board.
it was 1985. That was still totally okay.
it's
Totally
fine.
get it. It's
Yeah.
in context, totally works.
So yes, the Monitor finally makes his actual appearance.
I like
Nice.
that he gets rid of the shadows in the most logical way possible. He turns on the lights.
Yeah.
As far as we know,
That
that's
was pretty
all he
great.
actually does. Yeah. So
But a
first
great
issue.
great splash page with him. He's got a cool George
Yeah.
Paris costume, and he's a very striking looking character.
So what do we think? First issue, were you on board? Were you signed up and ready for more, or were you like, "What did I agree to?"
It was a little exhausting. I don't.
Yeah.
Is that the
It's a
right
lot.
way to
It
read
hits
it?
you with a
It's-
lot.
It's
Yeah.
a lot. I think I liked most of the second one a little bit more, just because we're done with all the the introductions and stuff. That being said, when characters I knew appeared, I was super excited. I'm like, oh look, an old version of Blue Beetle. I'm like, oh look, the original Firestorm and Killer Frost. Like that stuff was really cool.
Yeah, I would agree.
I'm going to say I find reading this to be a chore. I find the storytelling very tedious. I'm not as a person who was not a big DC fan, not a big devotee of these characters, I find that I'm not given a reason to care about most of them. And
honestly,
it's definitely at this point, I would not continue to read this if we were not doing this show.
Yeah, it's. I wonder what your opinion would be at the time. Like, there's sort of a sense of, oh man, I don't want to be left out because this is supposed to be a big event.
Yeah.
But there's so much setup in this and very little emotional.
I feel like I would probably
interest.
be saying,
Sum
again,
this up
it's
for
a
me.
chore.
Yeah.
I don't want to be left out. But.
So my take on this is it's definitely a product of its time, and it's almost as if it was designed to be read in a graphic novel format, which it definitely was not. So that's a very odd thing to see for a book at this period. But I think also books at that period had these really ridiculous highs. Like, you just wanted to see super powered people facing incredible odds.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you really needed like a really complicated, engrossing character development story at that period. And hopefully that does come a little bit later on.
I think what's a surprise to me is that I assumed some of these characters were more popular, or they had in the first issue that we had a lot going on with these characters. That's why they were picked for Crisis. So finding out, say, for example, like this is the first appearance of Blue Beetle in a DC book was like shocking to me.
Yeah.
Because like I assumed that these characters had like stuff going on, and that's why
one
they
of the
were
better
important right now.
examples.
They made some very offbeat character selections in the first issue, and I think that was probably just a conscious choice. They were trying to show the depth and breadth of DC's characters, like the wide variety of places that DC has. And
I guess
You need to
it's like,
establish
we're going to
that-
get somebody from the Legion, we're going to get somebody from Infinity Incorporated, and somebody from this book and that book, and
Make sure that you know what we're collapsing.
I feel like
Yes.
I feel like I would have mixed that up with some characters I know. I feel like my buy-in is immediately higher in like the beginning of the second volume when we see like Flash walk out of like his future
Right,
crumbling
it definitely
with Batman, and I'm like, whoa.
Yeah,
It is
yeah.
a little bit more, I would say, traditional in the form of event comic in the second issue, which we will get to. Hey, thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode of Near Mint, please like, follow, and subscribe so you can get the latest in the podcatcher of your choice. Oh, and leave us a good review so more people find out about the show. It really does help a lot. See you next time.
This has been a non-productive media presentation. Executive producer Frank Hablawi. This program and many others like it on the Non-Productive Network is distributed under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives license. Please share it, but ask before trying to change it or sell it. For more information, visit non-productive.com.